Have you ever been addicted to someone who never even touched you? Someone whose silence echoed louder than anyone else's words? This isn't just longing, it's a psychological loop. You check your phone, they're online, they say nothing. Still you wait. Still you hope. But here's the truth. What you're feeling isn't love, it's obsession. And it didn't happen by accident, it was designed. Obsession doesn't require beauty, money, or even presence. It requires something far more powerful: uncertainty. That flicker of almost, that message left unanswered, that pause after vulnerability, that's what haunts us. And Machiavelli, the master of power and perception, understood this 5 centuries ago. He knew that control doesn't live in affection, it lives in mystery. In a world that tells you to be transparent, consistent, emotionally available, Machiavellian psychology whispers a darker truth. What is always accessible is never obsessed over. Because the mind does not crave what it understands, it craves what it almost understands. So if you've ever been ghosted, overlooked, or taken for granted, this isn't your fault. You were simply too clear in a world addicted to questions. In this video, we won't talk about how to be loved. We'll talk about how to be remembered, not as a memory, but as an echo, as the unfinished sentence they can't stop rereading. Obsession doesn't begin with love. It begins with a question, one that never gets answered. Think about the person you couldn't stop thinking about. Was it because they were kind, consistent, and emotionally available? Or was it because they left something unfinished? A message unsent? A glance that felt intentional? A silence that arrived just when you thought things were getting closer? You see, in the architecture of the human mind, what we cannot fully understand becomes what we can never forget. Obsession doesn't live in comfort. It lives in confusion. And the cruel twist: you don't need to be beautiful, wealthy, or charismatic to make someone obsess over you. You only need to become unresolvable. We've all felt it, the invisible ache of being ignored by someone who used to care, or worse, someone who almost did. You wait for their name to pop up. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder if you said too much or not enough. But what really happened? The answer is brutal. You were predictable. You became legible. You gave them all the pages of your story before they even decided to read the prologue. And when something is easy to access, the mind doesn't chase it, it shelves it. Machiavelli warned about this centuries ago, not in the language of romance, but in the mechanics of power. He understood that human beings don't worship what they're given, they worship what they're denied. The most dangerous weapon isn't rejection, it's uncertainty. It's the sudden pullback after warmth, the pause that lets imagination spiral. He taught rulers to govern not by love, but by fear, distance, and timing. And when applied to human connection, that principle remains terrifyingly effective. So if you've ever been left wondering why they stopped trying, why they forgot you so easily, it's not because you weren't worthy. It's because you gave too much clarity. And in a world addicted to drama, tension, and the unfinished, clarity is where desire goes to die. Obsession, on the other hand, is born from interruption, from the sentence left hanging, from the version of you they almost had but never fully touched. That's not just attraction, that's psychological gravity. This isn't a love story, it's a psychological blueprint, a step-by-step framework for becoming unforgettable, not through affection, but through absence. Because obsession isn't built on connection, it's built on interruption. What lingers in the mind isn't the person who gave you everything, but the one who disappeared before the ending, the one who left mid-sentence, the one who gave you almost enough and then vanished. That's the person you can't stop thinking about, because the human brain isn't wired for closure. It's wired for tension, for loops that don't close, for stories that don't resolve. What we chase is not comfort. It's emotional dissonance, a quiet chaos, the contradiction between what we felt and what we were given. You were warm, they were distant. You reached out, they stayed still. And now every silence feels personal. Every unread message becomes a mirror, not of them but of your own self-worth. You wonder if you were too much too soon, too open. But you weren't. You were simply too clear. You didn't fail to matter, you failed to create mystery. And in the Machiavellian structure of power, mystery is not decoration, it's strategy. Machiavelli never wrote about dating, but he mastered human psychology. He knew that power isn't just about what you show, it's about what you withhold. The less they know, the more they imagine. The more they imagine, the deeper they fall, not for you, but for their own projection of you. And when that projection is tied to silence timing and emotional withholding, it becomes addictive. This is emotional architecture. You are not here to be understood. You are here to be felt, and felt deeply. Obsession begins when someone almost understands you, but not quite. When they get glimpses, but never the whole story. That gap, that tension, is where the mind loops. You don't become unforgettable by being emotionally generous. You become unforgettable by being emotionally unsolvable. So if you're tired of being the one who always gives, always explains, always shows up, it's time to stop chasing love and start designing obsession. Not by becoming cruel, but by becoming structured. This is no longer about how to win someone's heart. This is how to take up residence in their mind. There's a kind of pain that doesn't leave bruises. No one sees it. No one applauds you for surviving it. It's the pain of being remembered only when it's convenient. The kind that creeps in during the silence after a message you sent goes unanswered. The kind that builds when you were the one who always reached out, always checked in, always left the door open. You remembered their birthday. You noticed their absence. You listened to the silence and waited for it to become a voice, but it never did. That ache you feel. That isn't just sadness, it's emotional starvation. And in psychological terms, it's one of the most effective forms of control ever devised. You weren't neglected because you lacked value. You were neglected because you were too available, too reliable, too understandable. In a world that scrolls endlessly for dopamine and mystery, being clear is not seen as a gift. It's seen as disposable. They didn't forget you because you were forgettable. They forgot you because you made sense. And what the brain can easily make sense of it no longer needs to revisit. That's the trap of kindness in the wrong hands. It satisfies too soon. Machiavelli would have recognized this instantly. In politics, a ruler who is fully predictable invites rebellion, not respect. And in connection, the same rule applies. When you give all of yourself, all your affection, your understanding, your loyalty, without asking anything in return, you don't create desire. You create emotional saturation. There's nothing left to chase, nothing left to imagine, nothing left to wonder. And without tension, the story ends. But obsession doesn't live in endings. It thrives in what almost was. You thought that giving more would make them stay. That generosity would earn love. But what you really did was show them the ending of a book before they had fallen in love with the plot. And when there's no mystery, there's no momentum. That's the paradox. Your kindness gave them closure they never earned. And closure, when unearned, doesn't inspire gratitude, it creates distance. That's how you got forgotten. Not because you weren't enough, but because you gave them everything before they were hungry. Obsession doesn't starve on rejection. It starves on too much understanding. And in that starvation, it loops. Forever. Obsession doesn't grow in the light. It grows in the shadows between moments, those brief flashes of vulnerability, followed by distance, the sudden warmth, followed by calculated cold. It's not the "I love you" that lingers. It's the silence after. It's not the presence that haunts us. It's the absence. And more specifically, the timed absence. This isn't accidental. It's a mechanism, a formula. And at its core is something psychologists have named intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of psychological conditioning. It's the same mechanism that keeps gamblers tied to slot machines not because they're winning but because they might. Every pull, every pause, every maybe floods the brain with dopamine, not from reward but from anticipation. Now transfer that same mechanism into human relationships. When someone gives you affection, then withdraws. When they open up, then disappear. When they text you at midnight and vanish for days, that's not confusion. That's conditioning. Your mind begins to loop, not from love, but from lack of closure. Not because they gave you too little, but because they gave you just enough to keep your hopes alive. This is where obsession begins, not in the heart, but in the nervous system. Machiavelli never studied neuroscience, but he understood this principle long before it had a name. He knew that control lies not in consistency, but in unpredictability. What people can't fully predict, they can't defend against. And what they can't defend against, they obsess over. Obsession thrives in the emotional what if. It feeds on contradiction. One minute you felt chosen, the next discarded. And the brain can't file that neatly, so it spins. It replays. It rewinds. Not to relive the joy, but to solve the riddle. That's the trap, the pursuit of understanding something that was designed to be elusive. We chase the feeling, we almost had the closeness, we almost touched the clarity we almost found. And because it's almost, we keep coming back, hoping this time it will resolve. But it won't. Because obsession was never built on resolution. It was built on confusion with just enough clarity to stay dangerous. That's not just emotion. That's architecture. And Machiavelli would call it exactly what it is, a system of power. You were taught to be kind, to be honest, to be emotionally open. You were told that consistency builds connection and vulnerability wins hearts. So you followed the script. You texted first. You reassured them when they pulled away. You stayed when they went silent. You gave softness thinking it would be mirrored. But what no one told you is this: kindness doesn't create obsession. Comfort doesn't create obsession. It creates stability, warmth, familiarity, but not the type of emotional chaos that haunts the brain. Obsession isn't born from safety. It's born from friction, from contradiction, from emotional imbalance. And here's the truth. No one likes to say out loud what's emotionally generous is often emotionally invisible. When you make yourself too easy to reach, too easy to understand, too emotionally available, you don't become cherished. You become assumed. The more you give, the less they imagine. The more they understand you, the less they revisit you in their mind. That's not weakness on your part, it's how the human brain works. In the economy of emotional attention, what's abundant becomes forgettable. Machiavelli would have called this a strategic failure. A ruler who reveals all his cards doesn't earn loyalty, he invites manipulation. Likewise, a person who over-explains, over-reassures, over-commits too soon removes all tension, and tension is the thread that keeps people mentally tied to you. The problem isn't that you gave too little, it's that you gave too soon. You didn't let mystery breathe. You didn't give their curiosity space to grow, and so they moved on, not because you weren't enough, but because there was nothing left to uncover. They didn't leave you for someone better. They left you for someone more complicated. That's the tragedy. You tried to love them, right? But love was never the metric. Intrigue was. The truth is, the people we obsess over aren't always the kindest. They're the ones we never fully solved. So if your kindness was overlooked, your vulnerability unanswered, your presence ignored, it's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of how your clarity removed the very tension that makes people stay. In a world drowning in transparency, what remains rare isn't love, it's mystery. And mystery is the currency of obsession. Machiavelli didn't write about relationships, but he mastered something far more universal, the choreography of control. He understood that people don't follow love. They follow tension, distance, contradiction. Obsession, he would say, isn't accidental, it's crafted. And the blueprint is chillingly simple. You give just enough to awaken desire, then you vanish before it's satisfied. Most people flood others with affection hoping to be loved back. But those who are remembered, the ones who are obsessed over, they do something different. They control the rhythm. They offer closeness only to interrupt it. They engineer absence like a sculptor shaping negative space. And what they withhold becomes louder than what they give. You don't need to scream to leave an echo. You just need to disappear at the height of emotional intensity and let their mind do the chasing. That's the blueprint. You don't give closure, you give confusion. Not by being cold or cruel, but by being incomplete. It's not the person who sends the long goodbye text that stays in our minds. It's the one who says, "I'll talk to you soon," and never returns. The human mind can't accept unfinished stories. It loops trying to solve a puzzle that was never meant to have an answer. This isn't romance. This is psychological warfare. And Machiavelli would argue it's not immoral if it gives you the advantage. In politics, he warned leaders never to give people what they want, but rather what they fear to want, and then to take it away. Because fear carves deeper into memory than comfort ever could. When applied to emotional connection, the effect is identical. You don't become unforgettable by saying everything they long to hear. You become unforgettable by leaving something unsaid. You don't inspire obsession through reassurance, you inspire it through scarcity. You drip-feed presence. You end conversations before they're ready to let go. You create emotional cliffhangers. And then when the timing is just right, you vanish. Not out of weakness, but out of strategy. Because in the Machiavellian blueprint, the most powerful figure in the room is not the one speaking. It's the one who leaves at the perfect moment. And in that silence, you don't lose them. You imprint yourself into their mind like a ghost they'll never stop chasing. Most people aren't forgotten because they were unworthy. They're forgotten because they made 5 quiet but fatal mistakes. These mistakes don't seem destructive at first. In fact, they're often disguised as kindness, honesty, or emotional maturity. But Machiavellian insight reveals the darker truth. Obsession doesn't grow in clean spaces, it grows in psychological friction. And when you remove that tension too early, you kill the very energy that makes someone loop you in their mind. The first mistake is emotional over-availability. You gave too much too soon, your thoughts, your affection, your history. You opened the book of your soul before they even proved they could read. And just like a novel skimmed too quickly, you became forgettable. The second mistake is chasing clarity. You thought making your intentions known would build trust. But Machiavelli knew clarity is the enemy of influence. When people know exactly where they stand, they stop wondering, and what no longer sparks curiosity fades from memory. Obsession doesn't thrive in certainty, it withers. The third mistake is full access. You replied too fast, were always available, too eager to please. But the paradox is brutal. What's always present becomes invisible. When your attention is free, it holds no value. The fourth mistake is over-explaining yourself. You justified every change in tone, every silence, every delay. You thought understanding would bring them closer, but understanding brings closure, and closure kills momentum. The fifth and final mistake is giving emotional security too early. You offered loyalty before they earned it. You made them feel safe before they even proved they were safe to love. And in doing so, you robbed them of the chase, the psychological thrill that sparks emotional investment. What should you have done instead? You withhold. You let people work for your layers. You leave room for interpretation. You let silence do the talking. You offer suggestion, not promises. Not because you're manipulative, but because you're deliberate. Obsession is never about how much you give. It's about how strategically you reveal. And if you want to be unforgettable, you must stop performing for approval and start architecting your presence like a story with missing pages. Because when someone has to work to figure you out, they never stop turning back to see if they missed something. Power isn't about being loud, it's about being felt. It's not about how much space you take up when you enter a room. It's about how the room changes when you leave. And that's where most people get it wrong. They try to build connection through comfort, through consistency, through emotional transparency. But comfort doesn't command attention. It soothes, it settles, it disappears. Machiavelli never taught leaders to be liked. He taught them to be remembered. And the harsh reality is this: people don't obsess over what makes them feel safe. They obsess over what makes them feel off balance. That flicker of tension, the feeling of almost having something but never quite holding it, that's what keeps someone up at night staring at the ceiling, wondering what they did wrong. The people we can't let go of. They aren't always the kindest or the most emotionally open. They're the ones who introduce doubt into our sense of control. The ones who didn't chase us but made us chase ourselves through their silence. Because when the human brain senses instability, it doesn't let go, it tightens. Not out of love, but out of survival. And so we spin, trying to decode what went wrong, what we missed, what we could have done differently. That's not heartbreak. That's psychological entrapment. And it doesn't happen by accident. It happens through design. Machiavelli's power wasn't about domination, it was about positioning. He warned that a ruler who is too available forfeits his authority. The same applies to emotional presence. When you are always there, you lose your edge. When you step back at the height of connection, you don't lose them. You become etched into their internal narrative. They don't replay your kindness. They replay the last moment before you vanished. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was incomplete. And that's the moment that rewires everything. Power, when reframed through absence, becomes magnetic. It doesn't require force, it demands memory. So, if you've ever wondered why someone still lingers in your mind long after they're gone, it's not about love. It's about timing tension and the unresolved weight of a goodbye that never came. True power doesn't begin with what others see. It begins with what you believe about yourself. Your identity isn't just how you behave. It's the lens through which the world responds to you. Most people walk into a room hoping to be heard. But the ones who become unforgettable, those who command attention without effort, they walk in already knowing they don't need to be understood. And that shift changes everything. You stop over-explaining. You stop proving. You stop performing. Because your presence speaks louder than your justification. This is where the Machiavellian strategy of identity begins. You don't chase perception, you engineer it. You don't beg to be seen, you become the figure whose mystery forces others to keep looking. Machiavelli warned rulers against overexposure. He knew that transparency, though praised, weakens perception. Modern culture may tell you to be authentic, but Machiavellian thought asks, which parts of yourself deserve to be seen, and by whom? When you offer full access to your thoughts, your wounds, your intentions, you don't deepen connection. You dilute presence. Because what is always accessible is never sacred, and what is always understood is rarely respected. So instead you become a contradiction. You offer warmth, but with restraint. You show interest, but never desperation. You become emotionally vivid, yet intellectually unreadable. That contrast, that controlled tension between being known and remaining unknown, is what creates obsession. The mistake most people make is thinking emotional intimacy is earned through full disclosure. But obsession doesn't grow in clarity. It grows in curated ambiguity. The people we chase the longest are the ones we never fully solved. They gave us just enough to spark imagination, then stepped back to let our mind fill in the blanks. And in doing so, they didn't just live in our memories, they colonized our perception. So ask yourself, are you living for understanding or commanding curiosity? Are you trying to be seen, or are you shaping the way they see you? Because when your identity is grounded in intention, not approval, you stop being a person they once knew. You become a story they keep retelling, trying to solve a riddle that was never meant to have an answer. The moment everything changes is the moment you stop needing to be understood. That's where real power begins. Not in dominance, not in performance, but in mastery. Not of them, but of yourself. When you stop chasing validation, when you stop pouring your presence into people who haven't earned access to it, when you no longer feel compelled to explain every silence, every delay, every shift in energy, you begin to evolve. Not into someone colder, but into someone calibrated. And that calibration becomes magnetic. Because in a world addicted to noise, the person who can sit in their silence becomes the loudest energy in the room. The weak try to be heard. The powerful change the room just by being in it. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He knew that rulers who overreached lost respect. That influence isn't taken, it's positioned. And your emotional presence works the same way. You don't gain power by flooding others with your truth. You gain it by selectively offering access, by controlling your time, your tone, your availability like currency. That's what real transformation looks like. It's not performative. It's internal. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows they no longer have to earn connection through overgiving. You stop texting first. You stop filling in silences. You stop chasing people who only remember you when it's convenient. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. You become unshakable. Your energy stabilizes. You speak less but with more weight. Your absence starts to say more than your presence ever did. You no longer feel pulled to fix how others see you, because you're too focused on refining who you are, and the world adjusts to that. People begin to lean in when you speak. They study your pauses. They feel your distance, because you've stepped into the rarest kind of power, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. This isn't a tactic. It's a shift. You stop moving from emotional need and begin moving from emotional sovereignty. And that's where the transformation is complete. You're no longer someone they evaluate. You're someone they orbit. Not because you took their attention, but because you reclaimed your presence. And in doing so became unforgettable. If power is presence, then obsession is choreography. It's not about being seen all the time, it's about how you're seen, and more importantly, when you choose not to be. This is where we shift from mindset to method, from philosophy to precision. Because obsession isn't emotional chaos, it's a system, a design. And those who master it don't stumble into people's minds, they install themselves. The first tactic is timing. Never show up when expected. Never reply too quickly. Don't finish conversations when they're still warm. Cut the scene right before the emotional climax. Why? Because the human brain remembers what it couldn't finish more than anything it fully consumed. Leave them wondering. Let them stare at their phone, aching for a closure you won't give. That's not cruelty, it's architecture. And what they imagine in your silence will always echo louder than anything you could have said. The second tactic is precision over emotion. When they send you a paragraph, you respond with a single line. When they say, "I miss you," you say, "I know." Neutral, not cold. Unreadable, not dismissive. Because when your words are rare, they become sacred. When your tone is calm, they start projecting. Silence becomes suspense. Every pause becomes thunder. Third, control the mirror. People don't obsess over who you are, they obsess over how they feel about themselves around you. Reflect their fantasies, then disrupt them. Make them feel desired, then disappear. Make them feel interesting, then change the subject. Give glimpses, never full reflections. They won't miss you. They'll miss themselves in your presence. Fourth, break their pattern. If they expect warmth, give distance. If they expect flattery, give silence. If they lean in, pull back. You must become the emotional anomaly, the glitch in their expectation. Because obsession begins when someone can't predict you, and therefore can't protect themselves from you. And the fifth tactic is the most Machiavellian of all: use absence as a weapon. Don't block, don't ghost, just fade. Subtly, strategically. Let time delay your responses. Let your tone cool. Don't explain. Let them feel the drop in emotional temperature and begin to question themselves. Because when someone starts doubting their impact on you, they don't pull away, they spiral. And that spiral always leads back to you. That's not manipulation. That's design. There comes a moment when you stop being a person in someone's life and start becoming a presence in their psyche. Not because you stayed, but because you vanished before they were ready to let go. You didn't give them the ending. You gave them the ache of never reaching it. And in that space, you stopped being a memory and started becoming a myth. Because memory fades, but mystery lingers. They don't replay the moments where you were kind, they replay the ones where you were silent. They don't miss your words, they miss the unfinished sentence. This is where obsession mutates. It's no longer about you. It's about what you represented: possibility, tension, identity. You were the reflection they saw themselves in. And when you took it away, they didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves they were when you were near. This is the evolution from emotion to legend. You're no longer someone I dated or someone I liked. You're someone I can't forget, even if they don't know why. And that's the point, they can't explain it. Because there was never a conclusion. Your absence didn't close the story, it became the story. Every future connection they have is now filtered through your silence. Every new person is subconsciously measured against the emotional high and low that you once engineered. You've become the standard. They can't articulate the emotional contrast that dulls everything else. They might try to move on, find someone new, even fall in love again, but they'll quietly admit nothing feels like you. That's not romance. That's architecture. You didn't manipulate them. You reframed them. You introduced them to a version of themselves they didn't know existed, more alive, more wanted, more exposed, and then you withdrew. Not in anger, not in cruelty, in silence, in design. And now you live not in their life, but in the spaces between their thoughts. You're the shadow that passes when the room gets quiet. The phantom standard no one else seems to match. You weren't forgotten, you were never resolved. And unresolved stories are never let go. They are carried, replayed, obsessively, silently, forever. Obsession doesn't end when someone moves on, it evolves when they realize they can't. By now you're no longer a person to them. You've become a pattern, a projection, a haunting. They don't miss the texts. They don't even miss your presence. What they miss is the version of themselves they only knew when they were near you. With you, they felt seen, chosen, electrified. And when you disappeared, they didn't just lose connection, they lost identity. That's the final conversion. You've crossed the threshold from emotional experience to psychological imprint. They start chasing not love, but clarity. Not reconciliation, but restoration. They're trying to feel again what only you made them feel. And they fail, because what they're really chasing is themselves in your presence. You didn't break them. You revealed them. You became the mirror that reflected their potential, their emotional intensity, their depth. And when you left, that reflection shattered. Now they scroll through photos, reread old conversations, replay your tone in their mind like a song they can't skip. Not because you said something cruel, but because you said nothing at all. And that silence became the canvas where they painted every fear, every regret, every hope. You stopped responding, but they never stopped talking to you. In their head, in their memory, in the versions of you they recreate late at night just to feel something real. That's the cruel elegance of emotional architecture. You didn't give them trauma. You gave them contrast. And now every moment of peace feels dull. Every new connection feels flat. You introduced them to a higher emotional frequency, and now nothing burns the same. This isn't about love anymore. It's about mythology. They defend your name to people who never asked. They bring you up without realizing it. You became a ghost they justify to others but can't exorcise from themselves. Because when someone rewires your emotional standard, you don't forget them, you carry them. Quietly, inwardly, forever. And that's the final weapon. You weren't just someone they wanted. You were someone they almost had, almost understood, almost kept. And it's that almost, that unfinished note that will echo louder than any goodbye. A myth isn't born by what you say. It's born by what you don't, by what you leave behind deliberately unfinished, by the symbols you scatter like breadcrumbs in someone else's mind. If you want to become unforgettable, don't narrate your pain, encode it. Don't say I was abandoned. Say I learned early that silence keeps you alive. Don't say I've been betrayed. Say some people teach you trust by breaking it. Let them decode your wounds. Let them project meaning onto your mystery. Because the more they have to interpret, the more they attach. That's the foundation of myth-making. You become the puzzle they never solve, the echo they can't stop listening for. Machiavelli understood this kind of power long before psychology gave it a name. He knew that control isn't just taken, it's invited through emotional ambiguity. So when people try to label you too cold, too intense, too hard to read, don't argue. Don't clarify. Let them define you in their own terms. Because the moment someone starts defending you to others, your image is no longer yours, it becomes theirs. And once someone feels personally responsible for the meaning of who you are, they don't walk away. They carry you. Don't declare your values, embody them in silence. If someone violates your boundaries, don't announce the lesson, let your absence deliver it. If shallow conversation bores you, don't complain. Let your eyes disengage. Presence is earned, not explained. The people aligned with your rhythm will adjust. The rest will remember you as the standard they couldn't meet. And you'll never have to raise your voice, because myth is quiet. It travels in symbols, in gestures, in shadows. When they ask, "Why did you disappear?" say, "Some connections aren't meant to be explained." When they ask, "What are you thinking?" say, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Leave them suspended in a moment they can't complete, because in that gap, you grow larger than life. You become more than a person, you become a feeling, a question, a ghost. Not someone they loved, but someone they're still trying to understand. And the human mind never lets go of what it never figured out. That's not manipulation. That's immortality. That's how legends are built in the spaces no one ever fills. The deepest obsession isn't fueled by desire, it's fueled by fear. Not the fear of losing you, but the fear of losing who they were in your presence. That's what they're really chasing. It's not the text you didn't send or the call you didn't make, it's the reflection of themselves they only saw when you were around. With you, they felt more alive, more significant, more chosen. And when you left, it wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about identity fracture. You weren't just a person. You were a mirror. And the moment you disappeared, they weren't grieving the relationship, they were grieving the version of themselves that no longer exists. That fear, the fear of never being able to access that feeling again, becomes the quiet panic they never admit out loud. It's not dramatic. It's surgical. It lingers in the background of their thoughts, tightening slowly and visibly every time your name comes up. You didn't slam the door. You didn't curse them out. You didn't need to. You left with elegance. And that's what makes it unforgettable. Your silence wasn't emptiness, it was pressure. Your withdrawal wasn't a tantrum. It was a calculated redesign of the emotional dynamic. Now they speak more softly. They hesitate before interrupting. They reword texts twice before sending them. Not because you demanded it, but because they can't afford to lose you again. And the mind will fight harder to avoid loss than it ever will to gain something new. That's not manipulation. That's gravity. Machiavelli understood this power well. He knew fear, when wielded wisely, is more lasting than love. But this isn't fear through force, it's fear through refinement, through positioning, through emotional scarcity. When your presence is no longer a promise but a privilege, people don't take it for granted, they calibrate themselves around it. You never have to beg for devotion. You never have to explain your silence. Because once someone fears losing access to the best version of themselves, the version that only existed when you were near, you don't have to chase them. They'll chase the feeling. They'll chase you. Not for who you are, but for who they were when they thought they still had you. There's a moment in every psychological loop when the subject stops chasing you and starts chasing themselves. You've now become more than a memory. You're a gravitational force, an emotional pull. They can't explain, resist, or escape. They think it's about missing you, but it's not. What they're truly addicted to is the instability you designed. The push and pull, the warmth and withdrawal, the glance that felt intentional, and the silence that followed. They thought they were in control. But the game was never about control. It was about calibration. And you were always 2 steps ahead. You didn't beg to be seen. You positioned yourself as something they couldn't unsee. Even if they try to move on, they won't find peace. Not because you haunt them, but because nothing burns the same. You introduced them to a rare emotional frequency. Now, every new connection feels too safe, too obvious, too soft. They scroll, they swipe, they search, but no one else triggers the same internal chemical tension. Why? Because you were never just a person. You became a standard, a benchmark of intensity they didn't know they craved until you were gone. And now, they compare. Silently, inwardly, relentlessly. That's not romance. That's emotional imprinting. And here's the brutal irony: they built the trap themselves. You gave them the experience. But they're the ones replaying it. They reread the old messages. They analyze your silence. They overthink every moment you pulled back, wondering what it meant, what they missed, if it was their fault. But it doesn't matter, because now they're looping. And you're free. That's the difference between reaction and design. You no longer respond. You no longer chase. You created something so emotionally dense, so surgically timed, that it no longer requires your input to function. Your presence was lightning. Your absence thunder. And that echo, it plays in their head without end. You are no longer a participant in their life. You've become the environment their nervous system reacts to. A storm that changed the emotional weather. A force of nature wrapped in stillness. Not because you said too much, but because you vanished with precision. And when silence is shaped, that deliberately it doesn't go quiet. It reverberates. You were never meant to stay. That was the design from the beginning. Because those who stay become routine, and routine is the death of desire. Instead, you became something else, a legend. Not because of what you did, but because of what you withheld. You never gave them the ending, and now they live in the middle of a story only you could finish but never will. That's what makes you unforgettable. Not your kindness, not your consistency, not even your beauty, but your incompletion. You didn't become a chapter in their book. You became the missing page, the one they keep flipping back to, hoping they missed something. But there's nothing to find, because your power was never in what you revealed. It was always in what you left unsaid. Most people fade with time. They dissolve into the noise of memory. But not you. You echo. Because you didn't just touch them, you unraveled them. You showed them the version of themselves they could have become, but only when they were near you. And now everything else feels dull by comparison. Every laugh, every glance, every new connection feels like a cheap imitation of something they didn't even know they wanted until they lost it. That's not longing. That's emotional mythology. You are no longer someone they used to know. You're someone they still measure against, quietly, shamefully, desperately. You don't need to return. Your absence is louder than their presence. And even when they try to replace you, they can't replace what you awakened. Because you didn't just create connection, you created contrast, the kind that can't be unseen, the kind that makes everything after feel too smooth, too safe, too emotionally quiet. You were tension wrapped in elegance, a storm hidden inside a whisper. And that's the paradox: you didn't need to dominate to leave a mark. You disappeared at the perfect moment, and that moment became their undoing. Because the most powerful force in the human mind is not love, it's the unresolved. And you were the question they never answered, the ghost that never left, the standard they silently still fail to meet. And that is how legends are made, not in presence, but in what lingers after. Fade to black. End of game. End of them. Not you. In a world that tells you to give more, speak more, and love louder, this message offers a radical reversal power. Doesn't come from presence, it comes from precision. You don't have to over-explain to be understood. You don't have to be emotionally available to be valued. The people who are most unforgettable are not those who give everything, they're the ones who give intentionally. They control their energy like currency. They reveal themselves in fragments, not floods. And in doing so, they create space for imagination, tension, and reflection, three of the most powerful emotional anchors in human psychology. The lesson here isn't about manipulation, it's about emotional architecture. If you've ever been overlooked, taken for granted, or felt invisible despite your efforts, the truth is painful but empowering. You were too predictable in a world obsessed with mystery. The mind doesn't crave what it fully understands. It loops around the unresolved. So the key is not to perform for attention, but to position yourself with elegance, scarcity, and timing. You become unforgettable, not by demanding to be seen, but by strategically disappearing at the moment your presence matters most. This isn't just a dating lesson, it's a mindset for every area of life: relationships, career, leadership. Stop giving your energy away like pocket change. Let your silence carry weight. Let your absence reshape the room. And if this resonated with you, if you felt seen in this truth, subscribe, like, and share this with someone who's always been the giver. Because now is the time to stop bleeding for attention and start commanding respect without saying a word.